So does more money make you happier? That's a good place to start. And there's a fairly famous research paper now that set out to look at this. It was by Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton, I believe is the other author. Maybe it was Kruger. I'll include a reference down below so you know for sure. And what they did was they looked at people's happiness levels and their income or their earnings. And they found that the answer was a little bit more complicated than, money makes you happy or money doesn't. First, they found that there's sort of a pattern, if you almost imagine like an upside down hockey stick, right? The steep curve going up and then it levels out. And what they found is that at this time, I believe this paper was published in about 2009, something like that, at about $75,000 in income, the increases in happiness associated with more money started to level off. So imagine this. You're making $30,000 a year and you get $10,000 more dollars, you're much happier. You get another $10,000, you're happier. You get another $10,000, you're still happier. And then somewhere around $70,000, you get more money. And it's not that it makes you less happy, but it just sort of flattens out. It's not as big of a deal. So they found that there was this effect of kind of diminishing happiness returns. And it kind of makes intuitive sense, right? So to use the example I just did, if you're making $50,000 a year and you get an extra $10,000, like that's a pretty big deal. Like that has a big impact on your life and what you can do and everything. If you're making $1 million per year and you get that same extra 10,000, it's like, yeah, this is nice, but not a huge deal, right? So it makes some intuitive sense. And that number, $75,000, is not necessarily a magic number. It varies based on your living situation, your circumstances, etc. And very, very importantly, you'll often hear that number miscited because that does not adjust for inflation. So in today's dollars, that number is about $115,000. And this is January 2024 when this is made, so adjust that accordingly. But their research, fairly compelling, seems to indicate that around, in today's dollars, $115,000 in income, you don't get that much benefit to your happiness. And they further broke this down, and they kind of broke happiness into two different types. So you can think about happiness in your life versus happiness with your life. And those are maybe subtle, but actually two somewhat different things. Happiness in your life is like the experience of happiness and positive emotions moment to moment. So, you could be happy in your life, but not happy with your life. Conversely, you could be happy with your life, like, oh, this is all really good, but I had a bad day. And so that second one, happy with your life, is more like stepping back, thinking about my life as a whole from 1 to 10, it's 8 or whatever. And they point out that earlier on, around maybe today's dollars, 100,000, you start to see less of an impact on that experienced happiness. And what that means is beyond a certain point, your actual raw experience of just emotional state day to day, there's not as much influence there with money. But your reflective happiness, where you're kind of stepping back and thinking about assessing your life as a whole, money has a stronger influence on that type of happiness, which again kind of makes intuitive sense. Because, if you're already making $100,000 and you get $10,000 more dollars, your day-to-day experience of life is probably not all that different. But if you're making $100,000 and you get $10,000 more, you might kind of step back and say, oh, it's been a good year, or, I'm doing pretty well, I'm earning more money, that's a good thing. So there's a lot of nuances here in this money and happiness relationship. We also do see, though, a study that came out a couple years ago by Killingsworth, is the last name, I think his first name's Matt, where he kind of challenged this. And there was a lot of research and a lot of, popular media articles saying the researchers were wrong. Money does buy happiness. Money makes you happy. You keep earning more money, you'll get happier and happier. And I'll include a reference to that paper from Killingsworth. But what he did, it was good research. What he did is he had an app that had tons and tons of different people on it, and it would just kind of check in with you, how happy are you day to day. And so that way you got, rather than just asking people to make a one-time judgment of how happy are you, you got those kind of repeated check-ins to gauge, how happy are you really? And what he found is that there was no, remember that hockey stick thing I said, there was no kind of flattening out of the relationship between money and happiness. It just kept going up, 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 up. But here's the important thing. If you look at his graph, which I can show you a picture of, when you look at his graph, you'll notice that the scale on the bottom of it is not linear, meaning it does not go up by the same amount each time. Rather, he used a logarithmic scale. And so if you were to take those numbers on the bottom axis there and make them go up by the same amount, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, etc., what you would get is that same more curved line, right? Where around $115,000, it's sort of flattening out a little bit. So bringing it back here, I think that treatment, while it's certainly mathematically correct, is not very practical, because what it implies once you get to those higher levels of earnings is like, hey, if you're making $400,000 and then all of a sudden you're making $800,000, you'll be a little bit happier. It's like, sure, by all means, if you're making money and someone offers to triple your salary, don't say no. But practically speaking, it's just, I don't think it's very helpful in real life, because usually we're not deciding between like, oh, should I try to, triple my salary? It's more like, I don't know, this weekend, should I work a few extra hours on this project, or should I go hang out with my friends? So this logarithmic treatment, I think, is not very practical. So if you've seen any of these recent articles that are saying, oh, money can buy happiness and it keeps increasing, etc., I believe the linear treatment of absolute income, where you're just looking at, for each incremental dollar, how does happiness change, is a much more practical treatment. And so I argue that you do in fact see that diminishing returns, that basically once you have enough money to be well off and quite comfortable, further increasing your income is probably not going to do a whole lot for your happiness. But there's also further nuances here. So it's not just our absolute income, meaning how much money we actually make, but there are two other factors that have a pretty profound influence on the money and happiness relationship. The first are changes in income, and the second is relative income. So this comes from a paper titled The Focusing Illusion. Several really good researchers on that paper. I'll include it down below. And they find that sudden shifts in income tend to have a pretty significant influence on happiness, at least in the short run. So again, it's not so much how much am I making now, but if all of a sudden you get, income is cut by 20% for some reason, that's going to bring your happiness down. On the flip side, if you get a bonus, right after the bonus, you're like, oh, this is great. So we actually tend to perceive more intensely the changes in our income. Further, there's some interesting research that looks at relative income. And so I'm not going to use the exact figures here because I don't have the paper and all my notes in front of me. But essentially what they find is that, for instance, it could be that someone is making, let's say, $100,000 and everyone around them is making $90,000. Okay, that's the first person. Second person is making $120,000, but everyone around them is making $150,000. Who's going to be happier? Well, you might think on its face, well, the first person we said is making 100, the second person is making 120. I'd rather make 120. That's 20,000 extra dollars. But what we find is that it likely would be the case that this person making the 120 is actually less happy with respect to money than the person making 100,000, because that kind of comparison and that relative rating makes them assess their income as relatively lower. Kind of interesting. So what we see is that there are a lot of kind of almost cognitive biases or cognitive distortions that come into the money and happiness relationship. Changes in income level, comparison relative to others are fairly substantial. So as we come to a close, I should share with you as well a final, maybe helpful thing to know is that, I said at the beginning of this video, this quote that money doesn't buy happiness, it buys an opportunity for happiness. And it is actually quite important how we spend our money, right? How we spend our money kind of translates our return on investment with respect to happiness in different ways. And I'm not going to do the full summary here because there would be a pretty long video, but I'm going to reference 3 principles to keep in mind. They come from a wonderful reference book that I'll also include information to below. It's called Happy Money by some really well-respected researchers. And they find there are really 3 things you can do to spend your money in a way that optimizes for happiness. So the first is use your money to save you time or avoid suffering. The second one is buy experiences. And the third one is spend money on others. So the first one is basically saying, if you have $100, you could buy a new watch. This is a Casio watch. It was not $100, it was much less. So you can say, I'm going to spend $100 on a new watch, or I'm going to spend $100 to get my apartment cleaned because I just hate cleaning and it's a waste of 2 hours and it's just the worst. Their research has found that spending money in that second example to avoid suffering rather than to try to gain pleasure often will make you happier. Okay, the second one is purchasing on experiences over goods. This is not a hard and fast rule. Certainly some goods are valuable and may generate a lot of happiness. But generally speaking, they say that there's something called hedonic adaptation, which means psychologically we tend to get used to things, both good and bad. So when you purchase the thing, you often get hedonic adaptation. So same example, my $100 watch, after wearing it for 6 months, I don't really think about it. Whereas if I were to spend $100 to have a really, really fun night and go to dinner at this new restaurant with one of my friends, I get to savor the experience and then have the memory of the experience. And because I don't have some material good to get used to or adapt to, right, I kind of get more happiness ROI, so to speak, from the experience rather than purchasing a good. And then the third one I said is spending on others. So there's a gentleman at Harvard, Michael Norton, who has a really incredible TED Talk on this based on research from his lab, where they basically took people and said, hey, you have to spend money on something. And one group, they had to spend it on someone else and buy them coffee or something. And the other group, they could spend it on themselves. And they found that, perhaps surprisingly, people who were told you have to spend this money on someone else tended to be happier both immediately after and for a longer period afterwards. So those are 3 rules you can keep in your pocket as well. So in summary, what did we learn from this video? Well, we said that the relationship between money and happiness is not as simple as, you often hear money can't buy happiness, or you might say, money makes you happier. Not really either of those. To a certain point, about $115,000 in 2024 income, you start to see this diminishing return. So less than that, more money makes you happier. And then after that, it's still a good thing, but not a huge deal. Also, changes in income and your relative income will also influence your perception of your income fairly substantially. And then, of course, you got those 3 principles to keep in mind to optimize your spending for happiness. So I hope you enjoyed this. Some of those tools and references are down below, as well as my happiness database, Happiness Encyclopedia, which you should check out at studyhappiness.notion.site, as well as some of my other resources where I share written work, etc. So, as always, you can expect resources and tools from the study of happiness to help you be at your best in work and life. Thank you for watching. My name is Jackson Kirches. Oh, no, let me forget. You can watch this video, which YouTube thinks you'll enjoy, and I'll see you next time.